The story opens with the protagonist getting his equipment and bike adjusted. You see, Junk Dog is a megalo boxer who competes in fixed fights in an illegal underground ring under the supervision of his chubby guardian angel, Nanbu. He yearns for a genuine fight without an obvious winner. That said, his current fight is against a blondie who gets carried away and starts throwing punches over and over as if he is that good. Thankfully, the coach tells him to fight back, and, as the great Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan till they get hit. Although he was whipping the guy's ass, the MC had to take a dive since the match was fixed for the main man to lose, hurting his pride. One evening, while having a night ride to clear his head, he nearly runs into Yukiko, the leader of the Shirado group, which controls the Megalonia competition. Yukiko offers to reimburse Junk Dog, but he refuses angrily, telling her that the Megalonia tournament is not true megalo boxing. Yuri, Yukiko's bodyguard, is offended by Junk Dog's lack of respect toward his employer. Our boy picks a fight with him in the hopes of experiencing true megalo boxing. Yuri gives off a powerful aura that gets Junk Dog pumped up, but Yukiko stops the fight from happening. Later, Junk Dog prepares to fight his latest opponent, but Yuri enters the ring instead. The audience is stunned because Yuri is the megalo boxing champion and is present without Yukiko's knowledge. Nanbu attempts to stop the fight, but is punched out by Junk Dog, who insists on fighting Yuri with his skill. Nanbu tries to stop the match once again, but to no avail, as the boss of the underground ring has allowed it to go ahead. Yuri gives himself a handicap by only fighting with one hand. At first, Yuri shows his superior skill and gear compared to our boy, till Junk Dog reads his moves and forces him to fight with both hands. Nevertheless, Junk Dog is knocked out in the first round when he tries to react to a feint body shot that turns into a very, very heavy hook. And just like all the cool kids, the champ turns his back to the explosion, thinking his job is done. But Junk Dog gets up and tells him that he still isn't satisfied. Yuri tells him that if he wants to fight him again, then he needs to work his way up to fight him in a proper Megalonia match. While riding his motorcycle, Junk Dog sees a billboard that says, "It's a wonderful district life now," which for your average Joe further inspires him to enter Megalonia. Nanbu tells him that he would need his citizenship ID to enter the tournament. Junk Dog starts to fight with his full strength, easily defeating his opponent in a fight he was supposed to lose. This gets Nanbu in trouble with the mafia boss Fujimaki, who runs the underground ring. Nanbu manages to bargain his way out by telling Fujimaki that he'll pay him back with the earnings when Junk Dog wins Megalonia. Fujimaki complies and creates a forged ID for Junk Dog, who chooses the name Joe. Nanbu enters Joe into the Megalo box rankings, which starts him at the very bottom in 257th place. He plans to have Joe fight the toughest opponents the ratings will allow so that he can move up to the top bracket in just 5 fights, with only 3 months duration. As the two visit the Ganshino factory to get better gear, they notice the shopkeeper has cool-looking gear from the Shirado group made from titanium. A boy named Sachio and his friends enter with a bag of stolen cameras, which they exchange for red candy, a type of drug. When Sachio realizes there isn't enough red candy for him, he demands a fair share, but the shopkeeper refuses. Civil talk ends, and they put their hands on each other. The shopkeeper goes one notch further and pulls a knife on the child. Joe intervenes but gets thrown out by Potemkin Higashi, a former megalo boxer. The guys go back to the junkyard gym they have with the kid tailing them. Then we learn that Nanbu plans to have Joe fight the 185th ranked megalo boxer, Shark Samejima, and the two begin training. Now, if we're being honest, till this point, we thought the Fat Guardian was all talk. Turns out he can move and has some solid training advice. Sachio interrupts their training and asks them to take him to Megalonia. When they refuse due to not having the time to take care of some kid who can't pull his weight around, he breaks in a Ganshino and steals the prototype to show his worth but gets caught. Joe, Nanbu, and the other kids go to rescue him. Joe tries to fight Higashi while wearing the prototype, but it breaks apart. Surprisingly, he's able to defeat him without it. Joe and Nanbu decide to take Sachio with them. Joe enters the ring for his first professional match against Shark Samejima, but shocks the whole arena by not wearing any gear for the fight, being dubbed Gearless Joe. This is all part of Nanbu's plan to have him attract attention. The fight is smooth, with Joe dodging all the hits, delivering some punches, and hopping around. Shark gets knocked down in the first round, which badly disorients him, and although he gets up at the 9 count, his head is still on the ground as we see him standing before the next punch hits just as the round ends. Feeling the pressure and heat of boxing without gear, Joe resorts to dodging and running away, which makes Shark lose his temper in the second round and foul Joe during intervals. Sachio scolds both Joe and Nanbu, which allows the two to focus and get their priorities straight. Nambu starts giving his boy actual advice and tells him, fear is good. Fear is what drives us to survive, and instead of fighting his rhythm, to go with the flow, to which Joe listens and loosens up. Joe resumes flying like a butterfly and stinging like a bee, knocking Shark out in the third round. Some time passes during which Joe wins 2 more fights and climbs to rank 102 while gaining a reputation for himself, even grabbing Yukiko's attention. Nambu visits an old acquaintance to meet Joe's next opponent, who is ranked 17, but is shocked to find that the challenger is someone from his past with a half-burned face. Turns out, this 17th ranked boxer is an ex-student of the coach named Aragaki, who fell out with Nambu after a military deployment led to him losing his legs in an explosive trap. At the time, Nambu believed Aragaki was dead after an initial news report mistakenly listed him as killed in action. When Aragaki returned to the gym, he was crushed to find it broken down and eventually demolished, and in his grief, nearly killed himself. This miscommunication led Aragaki to tell Nambu that he intends to destroy Joe as payback for breaking a promise that the gym would always be a home for him. Sachio researches Aragaki's boxing record since he's been in Megalo for 3 years prior and finds an unbroken string of brutal wins that leave his opponents in critical condition. Nambu wants to avoid the fight for fear of what Aragaki's retaliation could do to Joe, but Joe refuses to call it off. The fight begins with Joe and Aragaki initially evenly matched, making it look like a mirror matchup in some MMO. But an expertly timed blow from Aragaki in the middle of round 1 sends Joe flying into the air, a sight to behold, with the crowd freezing for a second before he hits the ground. Our hot-headed boy manages to get up at the 9 count and continues to fight. Aragaki, believing the fight to be a lost cause, nearly throws in the towel, but Joe stops him and starts to fight back by evenly distributing his weight as Nambu taught him. Recognizing the technique, Aragaki recalls memories from his time under Nambu and starts to break down as his anger overwhelms him. Joe lands a solid punch that merely knocks Aragaki out. The fight continues through the 4th round, with both fighters receiving numerous blows throughout. The camera keeps shifting to Aragaki's legs, as if there's a problem downstairs. Well, of course, aside from the obvious issue that he has no legs. That said, the match ends before the 5th round can begin due to a forfeit from Aragaki. He recalls his old coach's words, saying, "There's always tomorrow." Later, Nambu reconciles with Aragaki in the locker room, and Aragaki reveals that due to the damage his leg implants endured during the fight, he risks being bettered in, and this was his last Megalo boxing match. He gives Nambu back a failed betting slip that Nambu gave Aragaki as a good luck charm and which had stopped him from killing himself. He tells Nambu to give it to Joe. Yukiko publicly announces Glenn Burrows as the 3rd card in Megalonia. Meanwhile, a sassy-looking fella named Mikio Shirai tells Yuri that the general public cares more about gearless Joe than the other boxers, but he has a plan to stop Joe from making it to Megalonia. Joe continues to grow in popularity, but still has very little chance of being chosen for Megalonia. However, Lady Luck seems to smile on the Junkyard Dog. When Mikio wins his match against Sugar Ray, he calls out Joe next in front of everyone. The Shirato Group's executive committee urges Yukiko to put Mikio in Megalonia, but she has a different agenda and doesn't want her brother to get any further. Mikio tells Yukiko that he knows she set up his fight with Sugar Ray in hopes of knocking him out of the running, and she was also planning to set him up to fight Joe for the same reason. On the big match day, Mikio meets with Joe before their fight is due to start and reveals that he knows Joe is an illegal underground fighter with a fake ID, threatening to expose him if he gets in the ring. Joe responds by going to punch Mikio, but he is stopped by Nambu, who knocks him out. Although the old man has the frame of a tank, he is obviously as fast as a ninja. Mickey wins the fight by default when Joe doesn't enter the ring and promises to take back the Shirito group from Yukiko. After Mikio wins by forfeit, the Shirito group plans to officially name him the last Megalonia finalist. After realizing that Mickey still hasn't revealed Joe's secret to the public, Humor decides to beg Fujimaki for some information about Mikio in order to force him into a rematch with Joe. Fujimaki tells Nambu that someone asked for info on Joe's fake ID, but never got the full story from him or his men, leading Nambu to realize that Mikio bluffed him with half-truths. Needing to get leverage on Mikio, Nambu interrogates a former gear engineer who let slip that Mikio led a team to create a gear that could read the gear of other fighters. Try to beat the team, developing the integrated gear that Yuri now wears on his arms. With this info, Nambu realizes Joe might have a chance, and he tries every method he can to persuade Yukiko to call for a rematch. However, Yukiko is suspicious of Nambu and locks him in a room. That night, As the ceremony is held to introduce the final 4 fighters from Megalonia, Joe crashes the scene on his bike and demands that Mikio fight him fairly, recalling Yukiko's beloved words about true skill deciding the winner, not the gear. Yukiko decides to rip the 4th Megalonia ticket in half, giving a half each to Joe and Mikio, and declares that whoever wins their rematch wins the final spot. And just like that, we zoom straight to the second round of the fight. Mikio pummeling Joe in their official rematch, as Mikio's gear, ACE, has been significantly upgraded from before to learn Joe's moves and counter them within seconds. Yuri notes that Mikio upgraded his gear to be able to fight him, as a flashback shows Mikio using drugs to increase his synchronization with ACE to a higher level than normal. With none of his combinations working and being knocked down multiple times, Joe decides to drop his guard completely, confusing his coach, the champ, and, most importantly, ACE's programming, which made Mikio unable to finish Joe off. Further flashbacks show Mikio questioning whether the boxing ability is his or that of ACE. Joe decides to bet everything on a counterpunch. Nambu expects Mikio to throw a right straight, but Mikio punches with his left. However, Joe instinctively counters with an uppercut, knocking out Mikio and earning his spot in Megalonia and a spot in the champ's mind, as Yuri talks to him, saying, "As promised, I've made it here. Now be ready." At night, while Joe's team celebrates on their boat, Nambu sneaks out of their post-fight party to meet with Fujimaki. As Joe comes outside to take a leak, Nambu tells him that the real bet he made with Fujimaki was to reach Megalonia and then throw the match upon reaching the semifinals. Joe, angered that Nambu still wants him to throw a fight to save himself, punches him before speeding away on his bike. Sachio overhears their argument and runs away after feeling betrayed by Nambu. Fujimaki tells Nambu that if Joe does not throw the fight, he'll kill all 3 of them. Later, Nambu finds Sachio, telling him that he found out about his past. Sachio's father designed the prototype gear that Yuri wears, but his research was stolen by someone in the Shirato group, and the man himself later turned up dead. Nambu takes Sachio to Yukiko's mansion, offering him a chance at revenge, but Sachio can't bring himself to do it. So Nambu instead convinces Yukiko to take custody of Sachio to protect him from Fujimaki. Later that night, as Yukiko tries to find the truth behind Sachio's father, Yuri defeats Pepe Iglesias to move on to the final round of Megalonia. Outside the arena, Joe and Yuri talk about their motivations while a drunken Nambu stumbles around the boat, regretting his decisions and what led them to this moment. The next day, Fujimaki's men escort Nambu to the arena where Joe is slated to fight Glenn Burrows in their semifinal match. Meanwhile, Sachio refuses to go see the fight, thinking Joe and Nambu both abandoned him for a rigged match. Nambu is shown to the luxury suite where Fujimaki watches the fight. The Tiger fighter, Glenn Burrows, first enters the arena on a giant monster car that clearly doesn't shout he is compensating for something, while Joe enters by himself in the ring, wearing his old gear. After a visit to his old mechanic friend who also gave him the earphones, Nambu instructs Joe to dive in the 3rd round, while Fujimaki keeps a close eye on Nambu, chiding him for acting like a real coach even though he's about to make him throw the fight. Nambu hopes that this act will repay their debt, but Fujimaki states that Joe will be under his heel forever. As Joe gets pummeled in the corner, Nambu tries to encourage Joe to continue fighting while his gear falls off, and he hits the mat. Suddenly, Sachio appears ringside yelling at Joe not to give up, so the big gangster orders his men to get the kid, but then the champ enters and talks to Joe, telling him to get back up and don't disappoint him yet. What really sent him back to his feet was the words of his coach, telling him, "Show them what you are made of and fight for your dreams." Joe gets off the mat and manages to beat Burrows with a counterpunch, knocking him out. Meanwhile, Nambu begins to brawl against Fujimaki's men in the suite as one of them points a gun at him. Nambu grabs a knife. Meanwhile, Joe and Sachio are celebrating their victory and then race to the suite where Nambu is stabbed, his remaining "I put out" as payment to Fujimaki. Impressed with the spectacle, Fujimaki decides to let the 3 go free of all debts. Later, after these events took place, Yukiko signs a contract with the military for her company's integrated gear development, but is shocked to discover that Yuri has decided to have his gear removed. Yuri states that he wants to fight Joe in equal terms without any gear. On the other end, the newly blind Nambu invites Aragaki to help train Joe for the fight in his place. That said, you can never count the fat guardian angel out, as using his improved hearing, Nambu can critique forms by just hearing how punches are landing, telling him to not slack off, just because he can't see now, or he will kick his ass. Meanwhile, Yuri visits a reformed Mikio's cabin in the woods to get his gear surgically removed. Later, Yukiko learns that Joe's ID badge is fake and has an excuse to disqualify him from the tournament, but she holds off and decides to visit Yuri, who is in pain after the surgery. The man is screaming and hallucinating, but refuses Yukiko's help when she offers anesthesia, wanting to fight through the pain on his own, saying, "I remembered my old dreams before we met. My coach who taught me how to box once said, someday, if you're lucky enough, you will find an opponent who is strong and equal to you. He will make you excited and want to push further than your limits. If you're blessed to find this opponent, never let go." Later, Yukiko visits Joe by the riverbank, telling him that she knows about the fake ID but won't stop his fight with Yuri, as she can understand what made Yuri want to take such drastic action to fight him, and also informs him that the champ is now gearless, which makes Joe, or rather Gearless Joe, even more excited. But enough idle chit-chat now. It's time for the main event. Gearless Joe versus Fearless Yuri, who is also gearless now, by the way, as Yuri enters the ring with his gear removed to fight Joe in equal terms. We're shown that Yukiko is trying to make a deal with her military clients who want to customize her gear for weapons development, but she resents the idea, saying her inventions are to better mankind, not to be used to harm them. And although it has been mainly used by a boxer, it was only for extreme testing purposes. That said, we are back to the action. Though the recovery from surgery has depleted Yuri's stamina, he continues matching Joe blow for blow until he struggles to sip from his water bottle after 12 rounds, to which the little kid helps him with. In the 13th round, we see the coach crying while his hands are on the ring, sensing the fight. He tells the kid to save this image in his head, as it is beautiful. And indeed it is, as we were mesmerized by the scene when time stopped for both fighters right before they met everything on one last punch. Suddenly we shift to 1 year in the future, where Nambu has opened a new boxing gym called Gym Nowhere. The next Megalonia tournament is about to begin, with the original winner having vacated their title. Yuri is shown confined to a wheelchair, and Joe later stops by the gym on his bike to deliver a couple of packages. The ending title card reveals that Gearless Joe won the championship fight a year ago by knockout. Roughly 5 years since he won the title belt in Megalonia, Joe wanders to different underground fighting rings with simple megalo boxing gear under the name Nomad to fuel his painkiller addiction. His only stipulation is that the fight be legendary, which doesn't sit well with the promoter, as he always wins, making it hard for them to make money. One day, after overhearing about another highly skilled former pro megalo boxer called Chief racking up wins on the underground circuit and scaring off other challengers, Nomad offers to be his next opponent. Nomad recognizes Chief from the bar he visited the other night, while Chief appears to know his real identity as Joe. During the fight, Nomad realizes he's facing no easy opponent, and his pain is catching up to him. During the round breaks, our boy starts tripping balls and sees his coach with one good eye in his corner talking to him, which makes him go through more pain. When the second round starts, Chief takes a punch and lands on his face. Turns out he was the one paid to die by the promoters. Thus, Nomad wins by KO on a weak punch. In a parking lot afterward, Chief punches Nomad in the gut, taunting him for relying on painkillers. As Joe speeds off into the wilderness on his bike, he encounters a dead wolf and decides to bury him. Later, the ghost of Nambu returns to haunt him. Nomad registers himself for another fight when his motorbike is hot-wired and stolen by an immigrant boy. He follows the boy back to a makeshift community in an abandoned amusement park, where Nomad finds that the boy Mio already gave the bike and megalo boxing gear to his mother Marla for scrap. As she offers to help him repair the bike, Nomad collapses. He later wakes up in a trailer as the community is preparing for a festival. Suddenly, a construction crew appears and demands that the immigrants clear out, as the land is about to be sold at auction. However, Chief appears at the front and convinces the crew to hold off demolition until the auction goes through. Later that night, Chief admits to Nomad that he isn't a real ranked megalo boxer, but he pretended to be one so he could earn money by throwing matches. In the past, he was inspired by Gearless Joe's battle as an undocumented fighter himself to travel to this country and chase the dream of a better life. Mio overhears Chief referring to Nomad as Joe and ends up telling a mob lieutenant Mamoru Tetsu about him with the most annoying smug on his face. The next day, Nomad speeds off on his bike as mob boss Hiko comes looking for Joe, only to find him gone, while Chief boasts about his plan to win the upcoming Megalo Box tournament and buy his community's land back with the prize money. Meanwhile, Nomad flashes back to his last moments with Nambu and blames himself for his death as he opens another bottle of painkillers before a fight. The next night, Nomad returns to Chief and offers to train with him, saying he stopped taking the drugs. Joe works with Chief, but suddenly collapses from withdrawal from the painkillers and memories of Nambu's death. Meanwhile, Tetsu and his thugs lead a harassment campaign against the immigrants in the casa, quietly supported by Mio, hoping to drive them out before the auction. The opening day of the Grand Megalobox tournament arrives, and Joe continues dealing with his inner demons. But his counter-punching strategy works as Chief wins his opening match with a first-round KO. Back at the casa, Marla tells Joe more about Chief's history. He had a wife who died early on and a frail but brilliant son named Carlo who helped design Chief's gear to focus on defense. When Carlo died on the journey to this country, Chief abused painkillers and alcohol until one day when his gear broke down after a match, and Chief himself broke down in tears before swearing to honor Carlo's memory by getting clean. Later, as Chief and his community fix a sabotaged water pump, Joe reconciles with his memory of Nambu. Joe then cuts his hair and shaves his beard, which is quite a bummer as it looked very good. The next tournament match starts, and Chief's acting abilities shine as they help him to make the other guy lower his guard for him to KO his opponent. Later that night, Tetsu's teenage thugs toss a Molotov cocktail into the casa, setting Chief's trailer on fire. Chief rushes into the trailer as the flames suddenly expand. Chief's trailer is destroyed, but he managed to escape with minor burns and a box full of cash for the casa. Meanwhile, Mio takes the blame for the fire and decides to leave the casa on his own. As the finals of the tournament begin, the developer tells Hiko that he doesn't care who wins as long as he gets paid for the lot. Hiko's megaloboxer Mamoru uses racist taunts and illegal punches to goad Chief into making critical mistakes, while Joe tries to pull him out of it. Chief and Mamoru are both worn down during the fight until Mio suddenly returns to cheer on Chief, giving him the resolve to KO Mamoru in the 5th round. With the winnings from the tournament combined with Chief's previous savings, his community has the money to buy their land. Chief convinces Joe to get back into megaloboxing for real and hopes to have a real match against him soon before going to sleep in his car. Sadly, the next day Chief is shown dead in his truck. The community holds a funeral for Chief as Marla finishes the purchase of the community's land. Mio tells Joe that they decided to keep Chief's gear in his memory. Joe thanks both Marla and Mio and leaves the casa on his bike as he plans to stop running from his past. Joe returns to Gym Nowhere to find a broken husk. Flashbacks reveal that Nambu was fighting late-stage cancer while Edison Liu, Yuri's student, requested a match with Joe, who was mostly focused on running the orphanage and being a trainer at the gym. Joe wanted to win the money from the match in hopes of using it to pay for an experimental treatment for Nambu and spent several weeks training. But Sachio saw his actions as ignoring Nambu while his condition got worse. In the present, Joe falls asleep in the broken gym, but wakes up to find an older Sachio attacking him. After seeing his face, Joe lets Sachio pummel him into unconsciousness. Later, Joe finds out from Aragaki that after a typhoon swept through the area over a year ago, Sachio managed to rescue the kids, but the gym was never restored. Everyone either went to an orphanage or took on other jobs. Sachio later asked Aragaki to teach him how to fight, but unlike Joe, he didn't have the natural talent for it. Still training anyway, Sachio later enters an underground fighting ring, and, as you guessed it, he is beaten badly. The kid swings like a gamsole in distress. So Joe waits for him to give a piece of advice, but the little brat refuses to talk to a former boxing champion. As he leaves the arena the next day, Joe fetches some water by a nearby riverbank and spots Banyuri, who drops a flyer for his Chinese restaurant as he speeds off. At the restaurant, a couple of local gangsters start harassing Koicho until Sachio smashes a bottle over one of their heads. The gangsters come back and ransack the restaurant before taking off with the deed to the building. Fujimaki later offers Sachio a chance to get the deed back if he can win a fight against a tougher opponent. Just before the fight, Joe goes to the changing room where the little brat starts shouting, "What the hell are you doing here?" as if he can do something about it. Joe decides to enter the ring in Sachio's place as Gearless Joe. Throughout the match, Joe flashes back to his fight with Edison Liu, how Nambu's condition took a turn for the worst minutes before the fight, and how Joe went down hard in the second round. In the present, Gearless Joe gets knocked out in the second round. A very smart transition, foreshadowing, if you ask me. Back in the restaurant, the children are disappointed that their unwanted savior lost, but then the man arrives and reveals he lost the fight, but got the deed back as part of his deal with Fujimaki. Before Sachio can tell Joe to leave, speaking of telling someone to leave, it turns out Joe didn't leave them because he wanted to, but because he was told by the kid with a badly drawn nose 5 years ago. Anyway, back to the action. Edison Liu trains hard for an upcoming bout against Mac Rosario. However, after Edison hears that Joe is back in town, he decides to confront Joe himself, asking him to be a sparring partner. Edison believes that despite beating Joe 5 years ago, The media and fans still see him as Yuri's student and not as a pro megalo boxer in his own right, because he didn't beat Joe in his prime. Meanwhile, Mac gives an interview to the media as they go over his history of being an ill-tempered megalo boxer who decided to become a cop. Mac was paralyzed while saving innocents from a gang dispute until a young CEO named Ryugo Sakuma got permission to test a new brain encoding system developed by his company. Roscoe gave Mac a fresh start in megalo boxing, and Ryugo got a chance to display his product's results to the world. The next day, Joe shows up at Jimmy's gym to practice with Edison. At first, the fight goes as you would expect from a two-time champion and a former pro who stopped fighting at his peak for like 5 years. Seeing this, Yuri wants to stop the fight as it delivers nothing. Luckily, Hira gets cut off by his coach, saying, "Don't you see the look in Joe's eye? He might be broken, but not his fighting spirit." And just like that, the fight starts to turn for Joe as the pace picks up. Sadly, they soon get interrupted when they find Santa taping the fight to use in his next article. Edison swears to take on Joe for real after his fight with Mac. Finally, match day arrives. Joe and the kids get ringside seats, though Sachio and Wicho don't show up. Yukiko encounters her brother Mikio as Mac walks to the ring, staring in Joe's direction. The match between Lou and Mac begins, and initially cautious, Lou just plays defense, dodging and checking hits, until the second round when he figures Mac out and gains the upper hand. However, as the fight looks all but lost for Mac, he counterattacks with sudden focus and ferocity, a phenomenon known by his fans as Mac time. Lou goes down in a flash, and Mac is named the new champion. With Lou gravely injured and hospitalized, Yuri voices to Joe his feeling of guilt over pushing his dreams onto Lou. Meanwhile, Mac is playing with his son, but when his wife hits the glass, making it sound like a ring, the new champ displays erratic behavior, forcibly taking food from his son Miguel. Maya, Mac's wife, brings her concerns to Sakuma, who appears sympathetic but simply attributes Mac's behavior to stress. On the other side, Yukiko contemplates her earlier meeting with her brother, where he claimed that Mac time is the result of BES's negative effect on the brain. Yukiko secretly has Roscoe investigated and discovers that Roscoe has been discussing the use of BES with the military. She confronts Sakuma and demands undisclosed experimental data on Mac in return for her cooperation. Sakuma seemingly complies, but orders the data to be manipulated before it is sent. At the hospital, Lou regains consciousness, but is told he will never fully recover and return to megaloboxing. Lou tells Joe, "You will not give up," and that they will have their fight as promised. Joe visits Nanbu's grave and runs into his still hostile Sachio, who tells him, "Jim Nowhere died when you left years ago. Things can't go back to normal just because you rebuilt the place." When a typhoon threatens the gym, Aragaki and the others join to help tie down the building. Mac grows increasingly worried about his deteriorating mental state and actions in the ring, but Sakuma encourages him to remember why he returned. After walking away from megaloboxing, this turned out to be sharing the ring with the legend himself. The next day, Mac challenges Joe to a fight, though Joe hesitates. Yukiko announces to her displeased board that she's considering severing ties with Roscoe due to the now publicized risks and potential military use of BES. Roscoe sends head researcher Yoshimura to pressure Mikio into retracting his thesis on BS risks. But Mikio instead advises his former student, "Accept and fix your mistakes." Later, Joe sees Mac visiting Lou in the hospital. Mac reveals how much Joe's journey to becoming champion inspired him. Lou also encourages Joe to accept the fight after recalling his time with Chief. Joe decides to fight Mac. Lou asks the reluctant Yuri to help Joe prepare, telling him that he should not blame himself for what happened. "He chose you, not the other way around," which makes the former champ recall his first meeting with Joe, the one that lit a fire in his soul. Talking about the legend, Joe comes to Sachio, and the two have a brutal sparring session. While beating the living crap out of Joe, Sachio tells him that it wasn't his fault that he lost against Lou and left everyone behind years ago. Sachio agrees to come to Gym Nowhere. When Joe collapses, he is taken to the hospital, and the children and Aragaki learn about the damage to Joe's body from megaloboxing and his previous painkiller addiction. Maya is contacted by Asamoto from the Shirado group and asked about Mac's condition, but she says nothing. Sakuma tells Yukiko that Roscoe has no intention of parting ways with the Shirado group and giving up on BES. Yoshimura becomes increasingly concerned with the dangers of BES. Joe is discharged from the hospital shortly after, and his friends hold a party at the newly rebuilt gym Nowhere to celebrate. Joe opens up about his experiences on the road and promises not to keep secrets. He then asks everyone for their thoughts on accepting Mac's challenge, which will likely be the final fight of his career. Despite their concerns, they agree to respect Joe's wishes and help him prepare. Joe announces that he will not fight gearless this time, but will instead use Chief's gear. Mac is told by Maya that she offered him up to Roscoe's BS experiment back when he was paralyzed, in exchange for a heart transplant for their sick son. Mac confronts Sakuma, who insists that Maya made the right choice and that Mac was able to achieve great things because of it. Mac is despondent and wanders the streets. Joe begins training with Yuri and Aragaki, while the children work on improving and fitting Chief's gear on Joe. Their focus is not on defeating Mac, but on playing defensively so that Joe can finish the fight safely. Mac runs into an old colleague from his days as a police officer who tells him how others look up to him both as an officer and as a megaloboxer. Mac reminisces about his life and the story of the hummingbird and the nomad that he used to read to Miguel. The nomad wanders, believing they have lost everything, but the hummingbird repeatedly reminds them of the things they still have and sings them a song. Mac decides to return home to his family. Mac tells Sakuma that he will do this fight his way and walk away from Roscoe afterward. The day of the exhibition match arrives. Before the match, Yukiko informs Sakuma that both of them must take responsibility for the negative effects BS has had on Mac. It is revealed that Yoshimura brought the real data on Mac to Mikio and Yukiko, and that Mac and Maya asked for their help in revealing the truth and finishing the fight without entering Mac time. Although Joe and Mac are evenly matched at the beginning of the fight, Joe goes down first due to his poor physical condition. However, Joe comes back and knocks Mac down in turn. Mac focuses on his family and fights at an exceptional level without entering Mac time, managing to get back up. As the fighters continue to trade blows, Sachio freezes, just as he promised Joe earlier, and doesn't throw in the towel. Mac is declared the winner of the match. Yukiko announces that she's opening up BS technology to the world so that everyone can improve upon and benefit from it. She steps down from her company post, and Sakuma is arrested. Lou begins his rehabilitation training with Yuri. Joe returns to Gym Nowhere to be amongst his friends. They see off Sachio, who has decided to leave Gym Nowhere to pursue his original dream of becoming a gear engineer.